Wowee, what happened to first base? The position used to be good. Welcome to Fantasy Baseball today on a Monday, June 29th. Frank Stanfield alongside Scott White and Chris Towers. 24 days until opening day, which apparently will feature Garrett Cole versus Max Scherzer. That's a spicy matchup. Should be a lot of fun. Today is our first base preview 2.0. And gentlemen, is first base the second most shallow position in fantasy baseball this season behind second base, especially when you consider DJ LeMahieu and Max Muncy? They have first base eligibility, but I imagine most people will actually be playing them at second base. What do you think?
So I think we have to start this conversation off with a what do we mean? What are we talking about when we talk about deep and shallow? That kind of discussion, because in one way, I think first base is probably pretty shallow. In terms of star level difference makers, first base is probably as shallow as it's ever been. I think you could maybe say there's three, and it really depends on whether you think Pete Alonso is a star level difference maker. Then you've got, your Matt Olsons, your Anthony Rizzos, your Paul Goldschmidts, who are good, maybe great players, but certainly don't count among the, potential fantasy league winners, let's say, the guys who can carry your entire team, those first round type guys. And so in that case, I think you can say it's fairly shallow. On the other hand, you can go down to, I'm looking at Fantasy Pros ADP, and, you can go down to Jock Peterson at 27 overall at first base, CJ Cron at 30, Joey Votto at 31, Yandy Diaz at 32, Will Myers at 35, Howie Kendrick at 36. The point being, I could see any one of those guys, Evan White at 42, I could keep going, Justin Smoke at 45. I could see any one of those guys being a starting caliber fantasy hitter. I don't know if there's any position outside of outfield where you can legitimately say there might be 40 plus guys who could make a fantasy impact this season. It's just a question of what you mean when you talk about depth at a position.
It's kind of a shallow league versus deep league discussion, I think, because shortstop's kind of the opposite. Shortstop we think of as very deep right now, but that's only if you're talking about a shallow league setting. If you're talking about a 15-team league where that also utilizes a middle infield spot, shortstop, you could get squeezed out of having a usable shortstop if you go that deep. But most people listening probably playing in something 12 teams or shallower, and oftentimes with just a head-to-head lineup that doesn't even use a corner infield spot. I would put first base behind second base, like you were saying,
ahead of
Frank. Well, behind. If we're ranking them from shallowest to deepest, I would put first base behind second base. But it's pretty close. The reason that I would consider second base shallower is like Chris was saying, you're never that far away from a potentially good hitter at first base. First base isn't a defensive first position. Teams are always going to want to stick an extra bat there. So even as the season's playing out, there's a good chance a lot of usable options will emerge there, though obviously you can't count on that as much in a 60-game season. But it's a little lacking in star power right now. And there's a chance if you totally ignore it and try to fill it very late, you'll be at a serious disadvantage, which isn't true at every infield position right now.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think, Chris, you mentioned that there's not much star power here. I think that also makes a lot of sense. It's just the position is just not what it used to be. You don't see as many guys going in the first round that are first basemen. Scott, I did want to ask you, have you adjusted your rankings at first base because of the shortened season at all? Because I was looking at which divisions face the most top 20 starting pitchers, according to ADP, and the NL East faces 5. Consistently will face 5 with DeGrom and all the Nationals guys. So you're looking at Freddie Freeman there. And then in the AL West, you really just have 2. It's Verlander and Zach Greinke. So have you adjusted anything for the shortened season because of divisions?
Well, that's interesting because the AL West has the most pitchers parks. So I was thinking.
Yeah, so that's on the other hand too. Yeah, so you have to balance that as well.
For hitters as opposed to a good one. I haven't. I mean, the thing about Freddie Freeman specifically is like he's so clearly number 2 at that position in between Cody Bellinger and I guess Pete Alonso is the obvious number 3, though I have a lot more concerns about Alonso. And of course, he's playing in the same division as Freeman, though I guess not facing DeGrom. So yeah, I don't really, relative to the position anyway, I couldn't really even make a case to move Freddie Freeman down. Maybe move him down a little in the second round. But I'll have to look at that closer because there are a lot of players I think you could move around pretty easily in the first half of the second round. Guys like Nolan Arenado and Jose Ramirez. People like that. So yeah, I could look at that some, but that's as far as I'd go with it.
And I think it you can overthink that kind of analysis. Yeah. The Braves are playing the Mets 10 times. And so you figure 5-man rotation, he should play Jacob deGrom twice.
He might not.
And that would be right. He might face Jacob deGrom 4 times. It might just be the way the schedule lines up that, those, I would assume 3 game series plus, one will have a 4th. It might, well, I guess he would only face him 3 times probably is the max. But it's possible that that's the way it lines up. And you end up with a situation where Freddie Freeman faces him 1 time or he faces him 3 times. Either way, I think that's probably the kind of analysis you worry about more for pitchers because there are so many more plate appearances for a hitter that those individual matchups, I don't know how much you should really worry about that kind of thing.
Let's jump into ADP. We mentioned not much star power. There is one. Cody Bellinger has first base eligibility, and he is being drafted inside the first 5 picks. He was the number 1 first baseman in both formats last year, both in roto and in head-to-head points. He was a top 5 player, just in general, in both formats last year. One of the rare true 5-category players, 305 batting average, 47 home runs, 121 runs scored, 115 RBI, and 15 steals. Scott, I've got to ask, is the 305 batting average last season misleading? From May 1st on, he hit 274. He's a career 278 hitter. He had that massive first month of the season where he hit over 400. He had like a 1,400 OPS. Is the 305 batting average from last season misleading, Scott?
I don't think it is. I think it would be more misleading to look at his batting average over the final 4 months and say, okay, he's this 265, 270 hitter, and completely ignore the fact he hit 431 in April and 319 in May. He significantly improved his contact rate last year. He went, looking to 2017, his rookie season, he was a very bad contact hitter, high strikeout rate. To last year, he had an elite strikeout rate, especially for a guy with the power he has. And the BABIP was 302 compared to the 305 batting average for the season. You look at the expected stats, they pretty much match up with what he actually delivered. So I think he lived up to his season-long stats. And if you try and slice and dice the season, you'll end up with some incorrect assumptions there about what Cody Bellinger is and isn't good at.
And I would point out that, that 274 average from May 1st on. I mean, the 162 game pace from May 1st on was still 43 home runs, 116 RBI, 16 runs, 102 RBI, 13 stolen bases with the 274 average. That's still probably, if not a first round hitter, very, very close. But I would also point out that came with a 278 BABIP. And, he is a career 305 BABIP guy. Last year, his overall BABIP wasn't actually that high. So, he hit 305 and it may have been a fluke, but if it's a fluke, it's because he doesn't sustain those contact gains, as Scott said. But from May 1st on, he only struck out 17.6% of the time, which is still very, very good, especially for a power hitter. It's slightly higher than his overall season mark, but it does not really suggest to me that what he did last season was a fluke. It's just, is this a Giancarlo Stanton situation where he had an outlier strikeout rate for 1 year and it'll come back to earth? And, then he maybe is a 275 hitter, but even if he is, it's very unlikely you're going to regret taking Cody Bellinger.
Oh, yeah, and I was just playing devil's advocate because I actually do trust the batting average. Based on the StatCast numbers, he was actually unlucky. His batting average last year was 305. His XBA was 323.
Yeah.
You don't normally see expected batting averages like that. His slugging percentage was 629. His expected slug was 638. So the guy just makes incredible contact. He was 90th percentile or better in barrel percentage, XBA, X slug, WOBA, X WOBA, and X WOBACON. Egg and cheese. Great breakfast sandwich. Would you guys rather have Cody Bellinger or Mookie Betts in the top 5?
I would rather have Bellinger, but I know there has been some debate over that. There are a lot of skeptics about Cody Bellinger in the season he just had. I think especially because of the batting average he produced over the final 4 months. And it's going to be like it's rare to find a stolen base source at first base. He and Danny Santana are basically the only ones.
Come on, Scott. Danny Santana.
That's what I said. He and Danny Santana are the only ones. But, Bellinger stole 15 in a full-length season last year. So there's a chance he doesn't help at all when that's the kind of threshold you're talking about over a 60-game season. You don't know exactly how that's going to break down. And Betts, I think, has a steadier track record there, certainly a higher ceiling there in the stolen bases as well. So I get somebody who would take Betts over Bellinger, but I would not.
If Betts wasn't switching leagues, I think it would be easier to make the case for him, but that just does introduce an unknown variable that I think you do have to dock him for just a bit.
But can't you argue, Chris, that it's a better lineup? I mean,
no.
The Dodgers lineup is pretty damn good.
Even in a down year for the Red Sox, I'm pretty sure they outscored the Dodgers last year. It's just, and if they didn't, like they were still, I believe, top. I think they were 4th in runs scored last year, the Red Sox. Like that lineup, even without Mookie Betts, is still going to be one of the best in baseball. So no, I think Mookie Betts is coming from one of the only situations where a move to the Dodgers would be a downgrade in lineup, but I think it's also a downgrade in ballpark. And so when you add those factors in with the fact that hitters usually, as a population, perform worse when they switch parks or when they switch leagues, I would just say that there are more things working against Betts that are unknowns, not necessarily red marks.
A point to Chris Towers because the Boston Red Sox scored 901 runs last year, while the Dodgers scored 886. So there you go, Chris. Scott, would you rather have Cody Bellinger in the mid-first, or would you rather have Freddie Freeman in the early second?
I would rather have Cody Bellinger as a top 5 pick. Yeah, my top 5 are Acuna, Trout, Yelich, Bellinger, Betts in a roto league. Might take Acuna out and put Garrett Cole in a head-to-head points league. But yeah, if I get the spot to take Bellinger, I'm taking Bellinger. Well, early in the second round, there's a good chance I'm looking at what starting pitcher is available. If it's a roto league, there's a good chance I'm looking at Jose Ramirez for the steals. Sometimes Alex Bregman falls there, which I think is ridiculous. So I almost always take him if he does. And it's very rare that I've ended up with Freddie Freeman because of that.
Freddie Freeman was the number 2 first baseman in both formats last year, top 10 hitter in both formats as well. For most of last season, Freddie Freeman was the best version of himself that we've ever seen. He did need arthroscopic elbow surgery after the season, and he played with it during September, which kind of slowed him down through August 31st last season. 299 batting average, a 964 OPS for Freddie Freeman, and then in September it was 264 with a 754 OPS. Chris, do you worry at all about the elbow, the fact that he had off-season surgery, and during the spring he actually did have some elbow inflammation? So does that creep into your mind at all when you have to spend an early second-round pick on Freddie Freeman?
It creeps into the mind, of course. But no, I have had zero fear of drafting Freddie Freeman. Maybe with the exception of when he was actually dealing with that elbow soreness in spring training, maybe it was a little concerning. But no, I mean, it's a situation where you don't really ever have the opportunity to choose between Cody Bellinger or waiting for Freddie Freeman, because Freddie Freeman's likely going to be gone when you're in a spot where Cody Bellinger where you would pass on Cody Bellinger.
Right.
But like, if it did come down to, if it was Garrett Cole and Freddie Freeman versus Cody Bellinger and Steven Strasburg, I would rather have Freddie Freeman in that situation. It's just not a scenario that is likely to play out in your draft. And if you want a difference maker at first base and you're drafting from the 4th spot, you can't really afford to take that risk. I guess you could probably take Pete Alonso in the 3rd, but I'm wary of that.
Yeah, the thing about like Freddie Freeman almost never lasts that long late in the 2nd round, at least not in the industry mocks, because it is there's a bigger drop off between Freeman and Alonso than there is between Bellinger and Freeman. I mean, Freeman and Bellinger, they're at least going to dominate 4 categories. And Bellinger might contribute in the 5th, stolen bases. So
Freddie Freeman's not a nothing in steals in a 60-game season. Maybe he'll give you 3 to 5.
But
it'll probably be.
He's not a nothing.
I mean,
Wait a second.
He stole 8 in 2017 in 117 games. He stole 10 in 2018 in 162. Then he stole 6 last year. So, it depends on whether you see that as a trend or whether he just, he is someone that you can, like Anthony Rizzo kind of used to be, where you never want to rely on him as a contributor, but he'll chip in a few. I do think there's a decent chance Freddie Freeman's better than Cody Bellinger this year. I'm not going to say it's 50-50, but it might be 25-75. Freddie Freeman is really good when he's healthy and hitting for power. And basically that's been 3 of the last 4 seasons. He had that breakout in his age 26 season in 2016, was a top 5 fantasy player for basically the second half of 2016 all the way through 2017 until he had that, I think it was a wrist injury in 2017. 2018 was bad, although he still led the National League in hits and doubles. So, the upside is a guy who hits 315 with 35 homer, 40 homer pace.
Well, I mean, I think he could even hit for a higher batting average than that.
Sure.
Freddie Freeman is the best batting average source at the position, I would say. And yes, there's a reasonable chance he finishes ahead of Bellinger. I think it'll be one of those guys who's tops at the position. But my point was, like, he's not going to fall beyond into the second half of the 2nd round or beyond that, just because, like, Pete Alonso I include in the tier after that, and it's a very large tier. So, like, if you're playing the tiers, you can only allow Freeman to fall so far.
I have taken Freddie Freeman in the 1st round.
Yeah, and I can't blame you for it either. The batting average, Scott mentioned, 295 or better each of the past 4 seasons for Freddie Freeman. So a legit contributor in that category. And he's great in points leagues, too. I mean, the plate discipline is awesome. A 12.6% walk rate for Freddie Freeman last year. The strikeouts each of the past 3 years below 19%. So he's great regardless of format. Can't knock you if you wanted to take him in the late 1st, early 2nd round. We've mentioned the name a lot already today. Pete Alonso. ADP is in the 3rd round. 26.8 is the ADP to be exact. He was the number 3 first baseman in both roto and head-to-head points. Of course, he set the rookie record for home runs last year with 53 home runs. But, guys, I have concerns over Pete Alonso. And I think, Chris, you share the same concerns. I'm about to find out if
I do too.
If Scott does as well. All right.
Yeah.
The thing is, if you're drafting a power source in the 3rd round of drafts, that power source really needs to excel in the home runs, in the RBI categories. And maybe there's a chance that Pete Alonso just does what he did again last year, at least on a pace basis for a 60-game season. But I'm willing to bet against it. He doesn't hit the ball as hard as other people who, we consider those elite sluggers. His 90.6 mile per hour average exit velocity was in the 78th percentile last year. And his slugging percentage in the 2nd half, it dropped from 634 to 522. His strikeouts went up. His infield fly ball rate went from 8.5% in the 1st half to 19% in the 2nd half. Scott, if you want a power-only source, why don't you just wait 3 rounds and take Matt Olson?
Yeah, no, I think they're very similar. Pete Alonso's a great power hitter. He's an 80 grade power bat, according to some publications when he was graduating last year. So it wasn't surprising to see him make a significant contribution in that category. Setting a rookie record with 53, leading the majors. Okay, nobody predicts that, obviously, but Is Pete Alonso going to be a consistent 40 homer pace guy? I think it's fair to assume he will be, but that's still a big drop off from what he was last year. And when you compare him to other players that we think have the potential for a 50 homer season, guys like Aaron Judge and Miguel Sano, Joey Gallo, Giancarlo Stanton, like Pete Alonso doesn't measure up to them in terms of how hard he hits the ball. Now, he doesn't measure up to them, at least Judge, Sano, and Gallo, in terms of strikeouts either. So, like, he can. I'm not scared of the batting average bottoming out. He was a 260 hitter last year. I'm not so worried about that because he actually doesn't strike out a frightening amount for a guy who has that 40 homer power. But I don't think he legitimately has 50 homer power either. I think that's reserved for a very select group that he's not a part of, and he's more like the Matt Olson tier of power hitters.
Yeah,
Chris.
He's an interesting case because, that average exit velocity, like you said, is pretty low. But when you look at average exit velocity on fly balls and line drives, which would be the more relevant thing when we're talking about power, he is 20th in baseball. And in terms of barrels per plate appearance, he was 11th. So, it is a situation where looking at just that average exit velocity doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. Mike Trout never stands out by average exit velocity. He's the best hitter in baseball. So, consistency also matters. And, once you start playing with the leaderboards on Baseball Savant, you sort by average home run distance. He's 13th. And so, I do think he is closer to an elite raw power bat than just the average exit velocity showcases. However, that being said, you said why draft Pete Alonso when you can get Matt Olson 3 rounds later. Well, once you start playing that game, it's like, well, why draft Matt Olson at 55 when you get Josh Bell at 84? Or why draft Josh Bell at 84 when you can get Miguel Sano at 118?
Josh Bell goes that 30 picks after Matt Olson?
Yeah.
That is outrageous.
And so
that doesn't happen in our drafts. That doesn't happen at all.
And so that's why it's less for me about my concerns about Pete Alonso as a player. I do think he is a relatively safe version of that bat, especially compared to Miguel Sano. But it's more just to say that in an environment like this, where every position seems to have a guy who can hit 40 home runs, and you can get Miguel Sano 120th, you can get Franmil Reyes even later than that, 136th at a different position. You can get Kyle Schwarber at 143. Once you start talking about guys who are basically home run hitters, like that's where they derive most of their value. And I think that's what Pete Alonso falls under. He needs to have a really exceptional season to justify this kind of price. And that's why I haven't taken Pete Alonso this year. It's not that I don't like him. It's just that his skill set is the easiest one to find in baseball right now.
I do think Olson's a good comp, though. My expected production for those two is virtually identical. The thing is, Josh Bell might be even better. He might do more things than just hit the home runs. Maybe fall a little short in the home runs. Maybe not. But I think he's definitely the better batting average source. So that's Josh Bell is a guy I am drafting. He's probably my most frequently drafted first baseman, honestly. And I didn't even realize he was going that far behind those two on average.
Yeah, and also consider when you're drafting Pete Alonso in the 3rd round of a Roto League, you're taking him ahead of Starling Marte, who is going to give you batting average, going to give you steals. And there are other players similar, like Baez is going to give you steals. Javier Baez, it is. Ozzy Albies is going to give you steals. Ketel Marte will chip in some steals and also give you batting average. So batting average and steals are scarce categories, obviously, for fantasy baseball and roto leagues. And Pete Alonso gives you what is, as Chris labeled, the easiest categories to fill, especially later on in your draft. Yeah. So just keep those things in mind. We've already, mentioned the names a few times here, but with Matt Olson and Josh Bell, there are 5 first basemen. I did not include DJ LeMahieu and Max Muncy on this list because, again, I think those guys are probably going to be used at second base.
I have drafted both as my first baseman more than once.
You can't. I won't say that you can't do it. You can do it, But I think most people are probably going to use them at second.
I think those positions are close enough in how the depth wise that it's close to a coin flip, whether you play LeMahieu or Muncy at first base or second base.
I mean, that also, like, you're probably drafting Ketel Marte like 65% of the time. And so you've probably already got second base filled up. And that's specifically.
I don't think so. I actually don't draft Ketel Marte that much just because he goes where a lot of starting pitchers do. But that's fine. That's fine. If you guys want to make the case that LeMahieu and Muncy are primarily second basemen, that's fine. I'm just saying, like, a lot of times I'll draft them thinking, oh, I have my second baseman now. And then somebody like Kevin Biggio will be there later. And I'll be like, but I already have a second baseman. Whatever. I'll shift this guy to first. And it turns out fine.
So in rounds 5 to 7, Anthony Rizzo goes in the 5th. Olsen is on the turn of the 5th and 6th rounds. Paul Goldschmidt is in the 6th round. Jose Abreu is in the 7th. And then Josh Bell is at the turn, the 7th, 8th round turn. Before we get into Olsen and Josh Bell a little bit more, you guys know by now, I am a Jose Abreu truther. In Roto and head-to-head categories leagues, I love Jose Abreu. He is my 4th ranked first baseman in Roto leagues. In 6 seasons that he has played in Major League Baseball, he's batted .284 or better in 5 of those. He has driven in 100-plus RBI in 5 of those, and he has hit 30 or more home runs in 4 of those. Scott, I've got to ask you, because I believe you have Rizzo as your 4th ranked first baseman, and you have Jose Abreu outside the top 10. Based on ADP, if you can get Jose Abreu 2 rounds later, wouldn't you rather take those 2 rounds of value over Anthony Rizzo in a Roto league? In a points league, it's completely different because Rizzo's plate discipline is much better.
I have yet to draft Anthony Rizzo this year. I feel pretty confident saying that, and I've done probably close to 50 drafts at this point. I haven't drafted Abreu much, but I think I have drafted him before. So I guess just going by that standard, yes. It's more because the range Rizzo goes in, I'm very focused on starting pitcher, and I don't feel like they're both kind of boring picks, right? They're both kind of boring. They're not going to, neither one has much hope of being the number 1 player at the position, let's say. Rizzo, I think, is a safer profile. He's going to give you runs, and Abreu won't. I think batting average, maybe Abreu has a slight edge, but only a slight one. Rizzo could have a higher batting average. They're in Roto specifically, they're pretty close. Now in points leagues, Rizzo trounces.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it.
Trounces Abreu because he has much better plate discipline. He's one of the best plate discipline hitters there is. But it's pretty close in Roto, especially if you think that 2 years in a row now, Rizzo's been falling short of 30 homers. If that's a trend or if it's just kind of a fluky thing and you still expect him to finish between 30 and 35 homers with that kind of pace anyway.
Scott, we've got to make some moves in these rankings then, because Rizzo 4th, Jose Abreu at 11. Disrespecting my guy, Scott.
Like I said, it's a big tier here. So it's, if you take the tiers approach to its logical conclusion, then they're ranked the same, even though they're that far apart. And for Roto leagues, they probably are in the same tier. For points leagues, like I said, they're not.
So here's an interesting one. Before 2019, when Jose Abreu did he lead the majors or just the AL and RBI? Either way.
The AL.
There's some bold lettering on that RBI column for 2019. When was the last time before last season that Jose Abreu had more RBI than Anthony Rizzo?
Based on the way you're asking the question, I'm going to say it probably hasn't been done.
2014, Jose Abreu's rookie season, which was also, I think, his best season by a pretty decent margin. And I point that out just to say that, RBI are kind of Jose Abreu's strongest category. Because he is a contact-oriented power hitter, not an elite power hitter, but a good one. He's going to be playing in a good lineup. He is someone who you should expect to, probably outproduce in RBI most players at his position. Well, Anthony Rizzo's been better. And so then I look at, Jose Abreu's 33. Anthony Rizzo is 31 or will be on August 8th. And so, like, if I'm looking at those two guys, yeah, I mean, maybe Jose Abreu, because he goes a little later, has a little more value. But if that's my thought process, I think I'd rather just wait the round that Josh Bell usually goes later and take him instead of Abreu, because if you look at all the batted ball metrics, Josh Bell was as good or better than Abreu last season, and he's not 33. That ultimately what it comes down to for me is, Abreu isn't in that same Pete Alonso category, because I do think Abreu will be more helpful in batting average. But he's not a threat to run at all. And so he really has to hit really well. And at 33, we have seen, like, he was, 14th, I think, at first base in OPS last season. He's not necessarily a special bat anymore. And so, those counting stats do have to carry quite a bit of weight for him in a roto league. And at that point, he tweaks an ankle and misses 2 weeks. The pace starts to fall off pretty sharply. And so that's, for me, where it comes down to with Jose Abreu, is that it's, again, not that I dislike him. I just don't love him. And this is a position where I want to love the value.
You might love the value on Josh Bell. I know Scott does, based on what we've said so far. You get him on that 7th, 8th round turn. Scott, for me, it just comes down to who is the real Josh Bell? Because last year was basically a tale of 3 seasons. From March through May, he had an OPS over 1,100 with 18 home runs. June and July, 766 OPS where he batted just 213. August on, he hit 258 with an 892 OPS. So, I mean, where are you on Josh Bell? Where do you kind of think that he settles in ultimately? Because he is kind of hard to figure out based on looking at the season in those 3 parts. Yeah,
and it's possible, I guess, the league caught up to him. And I think he's proven himself legitimately as a power hitter. Like, that was the biggest question about Josh Bell heading into last season. Launch angle kept getting better. The hard contact was there. Even during his rough stretch of the season, like August, he hit 8 home runs, I think, or maybe even 9. Like, he's going to hit for power at this point. And it's just a question of what the all-around profile is going to look like. Well, he's always been a guy who has good plate disciplines, really stood out for that. When he was at his very best, the expected numbers backed up the actual numbers. I think it's kind of like Cody Bellinger, where I think the most likely scenario for Bell moving forward is the full season stats, and the full season stats are still studly. 270 something he hit with nearly 40 homers and got on base a lot. I mean, that would still be great, but I'm not ruling out the possibility he's actually closer to the guy we saw early in the season. And that guy probably, he would have been flirting with first round status in fantasy. So to get him in round 8, to me, that's all upside at that point. Like, it's even if, like, his worst case scenario is probably like 250 hitter with 30, 32 homer, that kind of pace anyway. And then the best case scenario, you're talking about first round production. So I love taking Josh Bell there. He's provided a good excuse for why he collapsed down the stretch. He started playing to the breaking ball basically and was late on fastballs. Okay. Problem solved, right? The data seems to back it up. If that's true, I mean, I think he could get back to being just a total stud, MVP candidate type player.
Yeah, I mean, the issues for him are the platoon splits. He had a 761 OPS against lefties. If that's who he is, he can probably continue to be the guy he was last season. But if that takes a step back, the margin for error starts to get a little slimmer. The one thing when I look at him, though, is, when you look at like the rolling averages, say 50-game rolling averages as the season goes along, early on, he was an outrageously high BABIP guy. You're talking 380, 390 for most of the first half of the season. From that point on, it was basically like 235. The infield fly ball rate did creep up, but not to the point where, it wasn't alarming. It wasn't like 15%. The highest it got was like 10 to 11% for a few stretches. And so, like, yeah, he probably got figured out a little bit. But I still think there's a lot to like about him. He's got a good contact profile, hit the ball really hard last season, just behind Pete Alonso in average exit velocity on fly balls and line drives. So yeah, he is someone who Josh Bell, I think, mostly is for real.
Is he the one that you're most likely to draft from this group, Chris?
Yes.
Same for you, Scott?
Yeah, I said it before. He's my most drafted first baseman. I'm pretty sure, and I don't think anyone comes close. Maybe Matt Olson probably comes the closest, but judging by average ADP here on Fantasy Pros, 55 for Olson versus 84 for Bell. I mean, I'm only taking Olson if he really falls, and Bell, I might take him a little earlier than 84th actually.
Is it fair to say that Paul Goldschmidt is probably the first baseman you're least likely to draft from this group? I'd say probably for all of us, no?
I don't know that that's technically true. He's on my bust list. I'm worried he's going to bust this year. Obviously his production was down last year. Anybody can see that, but specifically it's the batting average against the fastball. The four-seam fastball just plummeted. So I'm worried his bat is slowing down. But it seems like everybody shares that worry to a degree. So sometimes Paul Goldschmidt just falls to a point where it's stupid value. And I've taken him sometimes when that happens. Doesn't always happen. Some people are, of course, you see Paul Goldschmidt's name there. Some people are really enthusiastic about taking him, but sometimes he falls. And, whether I see the bust potential or not, I can't just ignore value.
Speaking of the bust potential, we will have our sleepers, breakouts, and busts. I just want to quickly promote some things. We're going to have a mailbag this Friday, so be sure to drop a 5-star Apple Podcast review and leave your question there. We will read it this Friday. Of course, you can send your questions, fantasybaseball@cbsi.com as well. You can email us, but if you want to guarantee that we answer your question, leave a 5-star Apple Podcast review and drop your question in there. And Chris, you kind of hit us with some breaking news before. Yeah, that Chris. That one. You kind of broke some news to us before the show that the commissioner product for fantasy baseball on CBSSports.com this year is free. FREE, free. Tell the people.
The commissioner product, which is, fully customizable, kind of, I would say best in the industry, tons of features, tons of options. When we talk about, this double header, triple header schedule that you might want to do to get the most out of this shortened season. That's the kind of thing you can do on CBS Commissioner. You can schedule multiple matchups. You can really customize your schedule as much as you want. You can go up to 30 teams per league, however big roster size you want to do, flex positions, whatever you want to do. There's total customization, keeper stuff. I think it's, at the very least, it's free. So try it out and see what you think, because, I really do think it's certainly my favorite platform to play on. And that was true before I started working at CBS.
Same for me. That was the league we chose, independent of me working there. And since then, I've been able to set up my dream dynasty league on it. So like if you have, these things, these ideas that seem too ambitious, a place like CBS Commissioner, that's where you can do it. So this is a perfect time to get started when it's free. It's free, so why not?
Yeah, and a lot of people have already been asking us, how do I set up those double headers and those triple headers? I don't have that league setting in the where I play on the site that I play. Well, with the CBS Commissioner product, you can make that happen. So do it. Why not? It's free. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, sleepers, breakouts, and busts at the first base position. We'll do that here, Fantasy Baseball Today. Welcome back to Fantasy Baseball Today. Sleepers, breakouts, and busts at the first base position. This is our first base preview 2.0. Sleepers. Scott, get us started.
Sleeper at first base. I'm going to go with it's tough to distinguish between sleeper and breakout, right? Do you have one, Chris? I might need a minute to think.
I feel like breakout has more upside. That's kind of how I've always perceived it. Or maybe hasn't done something that they've done before,
This is all semantics. We've had these arguments all the time. I think sleepers generally go later, but you can talk about like a Giancarlo Stanton going 60. He was one of my sleepers just because I think people were literally sleeping on his potential. My favorite sleeper, I did my first base preview on CBSSports.com. You can go check it out. And my sleeper pick, I did a sleeper breakout and bust for each. Justin Smoke is my favorite sleeper at first base. He was not good last year, hit 208. Does not, I think his ADP on CBSSports.com right now is 315. I think it's later than that on Fantasy Pros. And there were concerns about whether he was going to play or not. I think with the DH, that's likely out the window now. And, you know, he was arguably the biggest underperformer in last season based on the StatCast expected data. Now, whether, you know, that's a fatal flaw in his game, he is slow, he is shiftable. But, you know, if you think it was bad luck, then you're talking about a guy who does have 35 to 40 homer potential and can hit more like 250 or 260. Playing half his games at Miller Park, good lineup. Justin Smoke, big winner with the DH, and, you know, my favorite sleeper at the position.
I want to go with like Ryan Mountcastle or Nate Lowe here, but I'm just worried they're not really going to get a chance with the season so short. So I think I'm gonna say Dominic Smith of the Mets. Hopeful that he's the better half of a platoon with Yoenis Cespedes now that they have a DH spot to work with. I think JD Davis is a lock for either left field or DH, maybe bouncing between the two every day. But Cespedes and Smith are going to have an impact there too. And if Smith plays enough, he could be surprising in fantasy. Just project out his numbers from last year, and I mean, you're talking about certainly a starting caliber player, and anything that has like 5 outfield spots, a quarter infield spot. So definitely on the deeper side of sleeper. No, I'm not drafting him in a standard mixed league, but Smith is going to be somebody I'm monitoring both for performance and playing time because he could really surprise.
Yeah, I'm going deeper here as well. You mentioned a name already here today, Chris. CJ Cron for me, 55 home runs over his last 2 seasons. He hit 25 last year in just 125 games, so that was a 31 home run pace over 155 games and 15% barrel rate. Hit the ball extremely well last year. That was tied for 7th in baseball. It was higher than Bryce Harper. It was higher than Cody Bellinger, Freddie Freeman, Juan Soto. No, I'm not expecting CJ Cron to be anywhere near as good as any of those players, but I do think he's going to probably play every single day for Detroit, and I do think there's some sneaky power there. Not drafting him in a 12-team league either, but you play in Roto, you need a corner infielder, 15-team league, whatever it might be. I think CJ Cron does have some sleeper appeal there. Breakout. Scott, who do you have as a breakout at first base?
All right, this one's easier. It's Luke Voit. And, you know, he was probably my breakout pick at the position last year. I actually drafted a lot more of him last year than I am this year, but it's not really through any fault of his own. You know, look at what he did in the first half. He was basically, he probably should have been representing the AL team in the All-Star game. Really good at getting on base, really good line drive hitter, does strike out a lot, but the line drives help mitigate that and has all the power you'd expect from a corner infielder in today's environment. In fact, if you combine his stats from the end of 2018 after the Yankees acquired him and the first half of 2019 before he had a core muscle injury that eventually put him on the IL for a while, required surgery, and really messed him up in the second half. But if you just take those numbers from when he was healthy and productive, Voit, I mean, he's basically, you know, kind of even better the numbers look than what I'm expecting from Pete Alonso, frankly. Is like a 44 homer pace over 162 game season. Just really, really good production from Luke Voit. And, you know, obviously in a deep lineup, so the RBI and runs will be there. There is a playing time question just because they have to find at-bats for Miguel Andujar, but they seem more likely to play him in the outfield in spring training 1.0 Andujar than at first base. So Voigt's role looks pretty safe.
We don't even have to do, and Luke Voit is my pick for breakout at first base as well. We don't even have to do the arbitrary endpoints of, you know, when the Yankees acquired him to the first half or the All-Star break in 2018. Just everything that he has done since joining the Yankees, including the really bad last month of the season when he was dealing with that sports hernia. He's played 157 games with the Yankees. He's hit 280, 384 on base, 517 slug, 901 OPS, 35 homers, 95 RBI, 100 runs. Like that's Anthony Rizzo, basically. And so, maybe a little less batting average, but similar production to what I expect from a guy like Rizzo, from what I expect from a guy like Jose Abreu, maybe from what I expect from Josh Bell. I think Josh Bell probably has more upside, but yeah, I think Luke Voit is being weirdly overlooked this season. I don't know if it's because of concerns about playing time or what, but he's 197th in ADP right now, which just frankly seems ridiculous. Like he's behind Ryan McMahon, who's done nothing in his major league career to suggest that he should it's absurd. Brandon Lau, Hunter Dozier had a good season last year, but I can't make sense of Luke Voit going around 200 right now. It seems like one of the better values at any position.
He's going behind Christian Vasquez. Think about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's
wild.
I think there's a part of it that's just, he got figured out, and that's why he was so bad.
No, he was playing hurt.
He might have been. I don't know. But you can't
he definitely was.
No. I mean, he might have been figured out.
Oh, okay.
He was definitely playing hurt. But even if, maybe he was figured out, there's no way to know that when he was playing hurt. He was really good basically right up until the injury. Even, a few weeks after the All-Star break, before the injury really became an issue, he was still hitting. And so I don't see any reason to be skeptical on Luke Voit. He didn't exactly back up his 2018, but he proved he's real.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to be in that lineup pretty much every day.
And another thing to keep in mind, they misdiagnosed that injury at first. He was playing with it, eventually gave in, had sports hernia surgery. And then they discovered in the offseason it was really a core muscle issue. So you just got to throw that second half out for Luke Voit. It's only a playing time question for me, basically. And I think it's a legitimate one, but it's, he's definitely worth where he's going.
Surprise, surprise. The Yankees messing something up when it comes to an injury. We've never seen that before. I'm going to cheat a little bit here. Someone who's going to gain first base eligibility in the first week of the season, Miguel Sano. I guess you can argue that he's broken out, but he's never done it over the course of a full season. If he's ever going to do it, he should be able to do it over a 60-game span in this shortened season. He averaged 3.3 fantasy points per game last year. That was the same as Matt Olson. He hit 34 home runs in 105 games. That is a 50-homer pace over the course of 155 games. You're telling me that if both he and Pete Alonso play 60 games, that they can't have somewhat similar production, and you're getting him 8 rounds later? Miguel Sano, breakout pick for me, just has to stay on the field. Scott, let's quickly hit the bust here at the first base position. Who do you think is a bust?
I already kind of got into Paul Goldschmidt. He's one of my top bust picks at any position. I'm going to go with Rhys Hoskins instead, since I already talked about Goldschmidt. And I'm sure he'll be... What, I take your pick, Frank?
No, I like Rhys Hoskins.
Likes Rhys Hoskins, and the bust section is not going to be very friendly to Frank.
Oh, yeah. No.
I'm leaving Goldschmidt for somebody. I should probably say Goldschmidt, but I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about Rhys Hoskins. Because in terms of, if we're talking about a bust being somebody who has the potential to just completely bottom out, I think Hoskins is that. Looking back over the way his career has gone, we have a pretty steady track record now of him not actually making great contact like you'd expect for a power hitter. He puts the ball so much in the air and hits it hard enough that when you're putting the ball in the air that much, you're going to end up with a decent number of home runs, as he does. But it's really going to hurt your batting average, the number of fly balls that don't leave the park. And he hit only 198 over the last 4 months last year. Of course, 226 overall. So bad either way you look at it, but 198 over a 4-month span. From a first baseman, a lot of teams aren't going to put up with that. Now, he does get on base a lot. Even at hitting 198, he had a 344 on base percentage. So that's saving him for now. And maybe it'll save him altogether. He also changed his swing this offseason. We don't know exactly how that's going to play out, but maybe it can help a lot of these issues. It's clearly, though, he recognized, this is a big enough problem that I have to do something drastic. And, making a drastic change at this point of his career. There's just no telling how it's going to go, but it's a desperate situation for Hoskins now. I think if he continues being a 200 type hitter, he could go the way of like Chris Carter and just not be able to find a job anymore.
Chris
frankly.
Carter.
Rhys Hoskins is a good example of why averages aren't often all that helpful. He had the highest launch angle in baseball last season, but it was only, a degree or two higher than Mike Trout's. And so clearly hitting the ball in the air a lot is not a bad thing. The problem is when you look at Mike Trout, Baseball Savant has all these visualizations that you can look at, and there's one that's launch angle. And Mike Trout, it's like everything is between like 15 and 25 degrees, basically. It's
which is exactly
line drive
what you
after
want.
line drive after line drive. Rhys Hoskins, it's like a big spike at like 40 degrees, a big spike at like 5 degrees, and he's just all over the place. And
he's an extreme fly ball hitter.
But the issue is not just that he's an extreme fly ball hitter, it's that he's an extreme infield fly ball hitter. He hits a ton of infield fly balls. I mentioned, the worst stretches of Josh Bell's 2019 were like a 10 to 11% infield fly ball rate. The best stretch of Rhys Hoskins 2019 was 9.6% over a 50-game stretch of his fly balls being pop-ups. And so that just tells you this dude just wastes plate appearances. He wastes plate appearances by striking out, which you can live with, but you have to be good on contact, and he's not. But he's not a bust pick for me just because I do see potential there. I agree with Frank, and I believe, at least, like you said, at least he did recognize something was wrong and that he needed to fix it with his swing. And so that makes me more optimistic that he can figure it out than I would have been otherwise.
He was day-to-day with a hand injury in August last year as well, so that's something that might have affected his production. The second half was atrocious. You're right, Scott. I can't defend that, but I don't want to...
4 months, not even just the second half.
I don't want to discount what he did in the first half. I mean, he hit 252, 375, 537. Oh, no. That's over the course of the second half of 2018 and the first half of 2019. But in the first half, he hit 263 with a 530 slug. So I don't want to just completely discount, what he did in that first half. He was someone being drafted in the first 4 rounds last season, and now you're getting him outside the top 100 picks. So Scott and I are going to disagree there, and it seems like Chris is probably closer to me when it comes to Rhys Hoskins as well. Chris, hit us with a bust real quick.
It's Jose Abreu. Like I said, he led the AL in RBI last season and finished 8th in first base I believe that was head-to-head points last season. And so that just kind of shows you how mediocre he was overall. 12th in the position in OPS among qualifiers. And he's 33. And so when we talk about guys that we're discounting for age, it seems like Jose Abreu, the best thing he has going for him is that he's a relatively safe hitter. And he's a relatively safe hitter who's 33, which means he's not all that safe.
I only have one thing to say to that, Chris.
Mercy!
How dare you? Hawk Harrelson is not proud of what you just said. All right, let's get back into ADP real quick and round things out here. Round 10, all 3 of these players are separated by 7 picks, and we just spoke about Rhys Hoskins, but Carlos Santana and Miguel Sano, mind you, this is for Fantasy Pros ADP. In a head-to-head points league on CBS Sports, you can sort ADP by head-to-head and by roto. Carlos Santana's ADP in a head-to-head league is in the 6th round. And
as it should be.
And it should be. It should be. Scott, he continues to get it done from that perspective. He was the 4th best first baseman last year, 3.6 fantasy points per game. Again, this is Carlos Santana. That was the same as Pete Alonso. Pete Alonso's going in the 3rd round. Carlos Santana, you're getting in the 10th. Scott, will he ever slow down in a points league?
Oh, well, he's 34 now, so
he showed no signs last year.
No, right, no signs this year. I'm not worried about it this year. You start to worry anytime a player's 34, I guess, but like you said, no clear signs. I'm not avoiding him because of his age. Carlos Santana has long been the clearest example of a player who excels in points beyond what he does in roto. Although last year he actually got his batting average up to a point that he was a stud in roto too, 33rd player overall in roto. But that was, I'm not sure you can count on those changes to stick. He started to regress back to his usual batting average range, which would be like, the 250 range in the second half. And, you probably shouldn't count on him sustaining that pace for roto. But it's worth pointing out he was actually a roto stud last year too. I don't know why in roto ADP he goes behind Rhys Hoskins. I would definitely they seem to excel in similar ways. I think Santana is less likely to just bury you in batting average. Yeah, I mean, I guess. But that kind of speaks to why I'm not enthusiastic about drafting Hoskins, I guess. I think Carlos Santana tends to get underrated in both formats, actually. He does get drafted a lot higher in head-to-head, which he should, but I still don't think it's high enough. And in Roto, he just seems to get totally disrespected. He's a perfectly competent starting option for you, whether he hits 250 or 280 like he did last year.
Yeah, and I actually drafted Carlos Santana in the head-to-head points Tout Wars auction. I guess I bought him at his price. I spent like $21 on him, so still very bullish on him in that format. Even still, I have him at $16 in head-to-head points, and Scott, you have him at $17, so I overpaid even a little bit, and I don't mind doing it when it comes to Carlos Santana in that format. Rounds 11 through 13, we have three names here that really stand out to me here, Chris. Yuli Gurriel, Danny Santana, and Edwin Encarnacion. Three very different players. Do you buy any of what Yuli Gurriel and Danny Santana did last year? Because Gurriel, while he always made contact, he was always a plus contributor for batting average, finally raised his launch angle and started hitting for power. He had that stretch in the middle of the season where he basically hit like 20 home runs in a 40-game span. And then Danny Santana basically just came back from the dead. Entering 2019, he was a 256 hitter with a 667 OPS. Last year, he hit 283 with an 857 OPS, 28 home runs, and 21 steals. Chris, what do we do with Yuli Gurriel and Danny Santana?
I don't tend to draft either one of them. But, the one thing with Danny Santana is, like, he hit the crap out of the ball last season. 90th percentile in average exit velocity, 78th percentile in hard hit rate. Like, he actually did hit the ball really, really hard. And so, you can't really fake that. And he is fast. And so I think he's going to hit for power. And I think he's going to steal bases. The problem is I'm not sure he'll, make enough contact for that to matter. And it's always possible that, the power was a fluke. I think it's unlikely, but he's not someone that I tend to draft much at all. Yuli Gurriel, he has to fall. And sometimes he does, sometimes I want to say the one time I drafted him this year, it was in like the 150, 160 range. And if he's there, I think there are reasons to like Yuli Gurriel. He's going to be a good source of batting average, as a corner infielder. The problem is the pop wasn't real last season. It just if you look at the underlying numbers, the average exit velocity, the quality of contact stuff, he was basically the same guy he's always been. He did raise the launch angle, but for a guy who doesn't actually hit the ball that hard, I don't think that's really that good of an indicator.
Short porch in left field helps, though, in Houston.
Sure. But he had a 322 xWOBA, and his career rate is 318, and he had not been a guy who consistently outperformed. I guess he had been a guy who I'll take that back. He had outperformed his xWOBA before, but I think you're probably looking at more like a 20 homer pace. I actually think the batting line could be pretty similar to what you would get from DJ LeMahieu. DJ LeMahieu is just much more likely to give you stolen bases and maybe a little more batting average ceiling. But I think Gurriel's a fine fallback corner infield option, especially if you need help at batting average. He's just not someone I'm excited about. And I don't think last year was particularly real.
He hit 31 home runs. 20 of them came in a 40-game stretch.
Yeah.
Gurriel. He strikes me as a guy who just got insanely hot for a short while.
Might have been helped by the juice ball as well. I mean, we still don't know what ball is going to be used this year.
Yeah.
There was talking in spring that
noting, though, historically, Yuli Gurriel, actually Carlos Correa, too, but Gurriel, because Chris mentioned he didn't hit the ball very hard. Pretty awful numbers in his career in Seattle, Oakland, and Los Angeles, the three pitchers' parks in that division where he'll be spending most of his time this year. So that doesn't help either. But yeah, he's a bust for me, Yuli Gurriel is. And Danny Santana, I think, is too. I mean, just bottom out potential there because the plate discipline and track record are both so bad. And, I'm not excited about drafting Edwin Encarnacion either. Like, this is really,
I need Adam. I need Adam here.
Extreme fallback territory here at first base if you've just totally messed things up. And, if Luke Voigt's still on the board, you don't even have reason to mess with this group.
3.7 fantasy points per game last year, Scott, for Edwin Encarnacion. That was tied for third at the position with DJ LeMahieu and Josh Bell. 34 home runs over 109 games. His 155 game pace, 48 homers. He's not done yet, man.
I don't like to admit the truth of how good Edwin Encarnacion was on a per game basis last year. Obviously, only played in 109 games, so it's it probably didn't feel like that for people who rostered him. And like 37 years old, a team with an all-star catcher last year as its backup now. I don't know that Edwin Encarnacion's going to play close to every day for the White Sox. If he does, shortened season helps with that. But if he doesn't, shortened season really hurts with that, right? That's like you need guys who get playing time. So, and then there's always a chance he falls off at that age too. His strikeout rate has been rising a little bit over the past few years, still pretty low, but it's been getting worse. And maybe the collapse is coming. I don't like counting him on as my first baseman. I don't. Pretty good value, though, if you want him as a corner infielder, I guess.
Adam would not be happy with you. I'm going to send this exact clip to Adam later on, and he's probably going to cry himself to sleep tonight. Let's take a look very quickly at some of the deeper names here. You guys have already talked about Luke Voigt as a breakout candidate, going 199.8 is his ADP. Christian Walker in a similar range at 199. About 25 picks later, you have Eric Hosmer. Jock Peterson is a name we've mentioned today. Daniel Murphy going outside the top 250. Joey Votto. So now we're starting to get into some of these older names at 260. Anyone stand out there? Christian Walker's kind of interesting, but that means you probably have to take him over Luke Voigt because they go in the same range. Yeah,
Christian Walker is probably the name that I think has the most potential to be a starting caliber first baseman. Although I do want to point out, we've talked about it a decent amount this offseason, but Eric Hosmer is another guy who...
That's your guy.
Like Rhys Hoskins, it's weird because I've never been an Eric Hosmer guy. But like Rhys Hoskins, he seems to have acknowledged the issue that has been holding him back in recent years, and it's that he doesn't hit the ball in the air enough. And it's not necessarily that he has to rework his swing. He hits the ball plenty hard. He makes good contact. He's another guy like Jose Abreu who produces more RBI than you would expect given the other numbers around him, and that's because he does put the ball in play, and he hits in that part of the lineup where RBI opportunities are. But, if Eric Hosmer does hit the ball in the air, we've been saying it his whole career, if he starts hitting the ball in the air a little more often, he can be I think he can be a borderline elite player at this position. It's just a question of whether the changes that he's made and the changes in his mindset and approach can get him there. It's an open question. We didn't get to see it in the spring much, although I do think he was hitting the ball in the air more in the spring than he ever had been. So it's something to watch.
I kind of think I should have taken Christian Walker as my sleeper pick at this position.
He was pretty good last year, man.
Hard hit rate, he was 16th. He was right there with like Yordan Alvarez in terms of hard hit rate. And, so clearly elite as far as that goes. First really extended opportunity in the majors, even though he had a very productive minor league career. And I think he's somebody whose value definitely goes up with the introduction of the DH spot, because they had Jake Lamb, who they were going to try and find at bats for, Kevin Crone, who had insane minor league production last year. They were going to need to find at bats for him. Josh Rojas, there were so many players who could take from Christian Walker's workload if the Diamondbacks weren't fully sold on him as their full-time first baseman. And now there's an extra spot to play with. I think that makes a difference for me with Christian Walker. I think to the point now with that DH spot where I wouldn't mind having him as my starting first baseman if it came to that. I think the production was more or less legitimate. He had 259 with 29 homers, and it took him, after taking him a while, to inherit the full-time starting job. So he could be a 30 homer pace guy, I think, and maybe even hit for a better batting average than that.
One more note on Hosmer. They don't track ground balls and fly balls on MLB.com. Unfortunately, it's ground outs and air outs, which is kind of frustrating. But for his career in spring training, Eric Hosmer had averaged 2.28 ground ball outs per fly ball out. This season, this year in spring training, it was only 10 games. He actually had more air outs in the air than ground ball outs. So, it's only 10 games. However, the best ground ball to fly ball ratio he's had over the last 3 seasons in any 10-game stretch was 0.70, which is basically what he was in the spring. So it's not guaranteed. It's something to watch for.
All righty. First base is in the books. Tomorrow we'll have second base. We'll go around the horn the rest of the week. Friday we have a mailbag, so make sure you send some questions in for Scott and Chris. I am Frank. Thank you all for listening and watching Fantasy Baseball Today on our YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.